Welcome to a new episode about swords. I'd like to show you a bronze Mycenean Type G sword made by Nora-Adjik Foundry. Type G Mycenean swords are known as horned swords due to protrusions for the index finger, not a guard. This piece was crafted for a long-time loyal customer of our workshop. As you can see, it's a rather ornate sword, especially in its finishes. It's a full tang sword, meaning the blade extends through the handle to the pommel. In cutlery terminology, there are terms like hidden tang that describe how the blade extends into the handle. This sword has a pommel that develops directly from the handle, or rather from the tang of the sword itself. It's suspended by this shoulder strap and worn at the hip like a belt. Personally, I always place my index finger here, as I believe this sword was gripped this way. There's an ongoing debate online about how these swords were actually used. After creating it, I mainly focused on crafting the pommel, handle, polishing, bevels, and essentially all the post-casting work. My friend Sandro Garau and I cast it, then we decided with the client on the desired finish. I went beyond the initial budget, opting for an almost mirror-polished version with defined bevels. The sword isn't sharp, so it's not a weapon. It has no point. As you can see, it doesn't pierce. Thus, it's not a weapon, just an expensive ornament, a simulacrum. Laws for bladed weapons don't apply to simulacra. What else is in this sword? Well, first, its balance point. Here you see. A palm from the handle's end, not the guard, because I don't think this is a guard, but the handle's end. When discussing how these swords were held, the main clue is that the grip's end extends well past the supposed guard. So the resulting grip is like this, where, as you see with the thumb, even if you wanted to, some might say, that's how it's used, putting the thumb for support like in the 1400s, 1500s. But personally, this grip is very uncomfortable, just doesn't seem right. The hand is totally squeezed between the supposed guard and pommel. Instead, using what's called a handshake grip, you actually get completely different ergonomics. And it's for this reason that I assume the handle was made this way. Why? Firstly, this is the pointing gesture. Modern fencers know that swords and foils have what we call a pistol grip, shaped exactly like this. Being able to point makes thrusts more precise. I could easily target the camera as my index finger aligns perfectly with the blade. Obviously, it's much easier when the finger is aligned with the rest of the sword. In Mycenean and Minoan art, we see how warriors use this sword, which was common in both cultures. They're shown hanging onto the enemy's shield and thrusting the sword tip like this. It's usually a flat 2D image without depth, drawn either this way or reversed. There's also the issue of how the sword passes in front of the body. You might have noticed that when I do this, the sword crosses my face. In art, to avoid this problem, they'd show the sword much higher, then striking the foe. Personally, an even simpler way to execute a thrust is this. Striking with this guiding finger makes the direction much easier. Another important detail is the pommel itself. The pommel, as I mentioned before, can be quite uncomfortable when gripped this way. It's really annoying, and you can feel it literally bothering your hand. This grip, however, is much more comfortable, and the sword acts with a hook-like effect at the end of your hand. Also, when holding the sword in this position, the pommel, as you can see, sits under the palm, and I'm literally holding the sword with just 2 fingers. In balancing the sword and pommel, the pommel isn't acting as a counterweight here. It's simply leveraging against the hand, allowing me to hold the sword with just 2 fingers. In contrast, you'll see this doesn't happen when the pommel goes the opposite way. I believe they understood this concept perfectly and used it to their advantage. Ultimately, while some authors, particularly British ones like Matt Easton, argue these swords were used for cutting blows, forcing a specific movement because we can't do this. Obviously, this gesture causes the pommel to dig into the hand, theoretically forcing a certain movement. It's similar to Indian swords with disc-shaped pommels that restrict movement, emphasizing specific cutting techniques. In my opinion, this feature isn't present in these specific bronze swords. It might exist in other swords, but not this one. There are many types of bronze swords. In fact, making bronze swords is a distinct topic from iron swords. We're dealing with a completely different technology here. These swords, in my view, aren't designed to cut by impact like other swords. Instead, they're more refined objects, similar to kitchen knives. The cutting motion is more of a slice or draw, like this or that. You might pull back or draw it this way. For thrusting, the sword cuts with these movements, or finishes the opponent with a stab, a lunge, a thrust, whatever you want to call it. This type of thrust is, at least for me, the primary use of this sword. In fact, this sword, as I see it, might not even need sharp edges. It could simply be used for thrusting. Obviously, having sharp edges is better as it makes the sword versatile. It can do more. Cut on the backswing, thrust with the tip, and still cut if you miss, and so on. Moreover, these swords are not at all suitable for impact, in my opinion. This so-called guard isn't meant to catch the opponent's blade. It's almost touching the wielder's fingers, so it'd be useless for that anyway. Besides, there's the whole ergonomics of these guards. Compare it to a sword made by Neil Burridge, who I consider my mentor. Neil based his model on originals too. We actually cast this one together when I visited him in Cornwall while living in England. Honestly, if I were designing a guard, I wouldn't do it like this at all. I asked Neil if he thought these swords used this guard in this way. He didn't really answer, saying fencers probably know more about this than sword makers. Personally, I think the ergonomics of his model clearly points to this type of sword use. You can see how far the wooden handle, the grip, extends practically up to here. You can clearly see this flat surface, theoretically useful for resting something. In reality, it's for the finger, forming a hook that's very useful for placing the index finger. Moreover, for this sword model, we have an insertable pommel, so we don't have an exact idea of its shape. However, for this type of sword, we know the pommel is D-shaped and the sword was used like this. That's all there is to it. If you're interested in this kind of work, you can contact me on my YouTube channel. Also, we have a Facebook page called the Neuragic Foundry, which means the Neuragic Foundry. We create these types of replicas. We also make other replicas and custom cast objects. We work with bronze, copper, brass, aluminum, and all low melting point metals. We do this craft work, and I think I'm one of the few in Italy still making bronze swords. I know some colleagues who do this, some are really skilled. If you're interested in this kind of craftsmanship and want a gem like this in your collection, you know how to reach me. I hope you enjoyed the video. We'll see you on this channel for more videos about historical reenactment, swords, and everything related to archaeology and history. Take care and see you soon. Bye.